Let's take a look at what JavaScript is and what it looks like. We'll start with a simple example. JavaScript can be used to manipulate HTML, the browser, and to talk with services like APIs that live on other servers. In this example, we see simple HTML with a button on it. This will display a button that has the text "See the date" on it. Now, when you click the button, the onClick event will execute, and that executes this line of code, which is JavaScript. This is inline JavaScript. You can basically write it anywhere in HTML, just like you can have inline CSS. This particular JavaScript code first selects an element with the ID of demo, and that is this paragraph element here. And it then sets the inner HTML property of that element to the value of the date function. The date function is a built-in function of JavaScript that generates the complete current date and time. This results in a web page that looks like this. The complete date and time, including time zone, is displayed as the inner HTML of the demo paragraph, so as text that is inserted within the paragraph element. Think about what happens here for a minute. JavaScript is used to select an HTML element and alter one of its properties. That is pretty cool. And it does that without refreshing the page. Let's look at this example with a different formatting. This is the same HTML and the same JavaScript. Only here, the JavaScript code is moved to the head element in script tags. Now it is reusable in the rest of the HTML document by just calling the showDate function, which fills the demo element with the current date and time. This results in the exact same web page as the previous example. And now the same again, but again slightly different. This is the same HTML as before, and the onClick element still calls the showDate function. But the JavaScript itself is now removed from the HTML page to a separate JavaScript file called scriptfile.js. And here in the HTML document we reference that file. This is very similar to how you can include external CSS in your HTML document. This results in the exact same web page as the previous examples. When you separate JavaScript from HTML, it becomes reusable, because now I can use this function in this page, but also in other pages. Alright, so we've seen that we can use JavaScript to interact with and change HTML. We can also use JavaScript to interact with the browser that it runs in. The JavaScript here does exactly that. It opens up a prompt from the window object and asks for a name, which it then stores in the name object. If there was a name entered, the text variable gets the value of hello with the entered name. And finally, this text, including the name that was entered, is displayed in the name element by changing its HTML. When you run this, it looks like this in a web browser. This prompt is no longer HTML, but is a part of the web browser, in this case the Google Chrome browser. So you can use JavaScript to interact with its environment, the browser. Also, you see in this example that we can use variables in JavaScript and that we can have if statements and string concatenations. These are all typical features of a programming language. Another thing that we can do with JavaScript is make AJAX calls. This was all the rage back in the day because using AJAX you could do all sorts of interactive and advanced things from the browser without having to refresh the page. AJAX, by the way, stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, and is just a certain technique that involves JavaScript. It is not an additional technology. Here is how it works. In your web browser, you have loaded an HTML document and some JavaScript that might have come from an external JavaScript document. Now, from the browser, you can call an external API that might have a URL like this. This API can return something like a document that you then process using JavaScript in the browser. The point of this is that using JavaScript in the context of the AJAX technique, you can call server-side resources, like APIs, without refreshing your browser. This allows developers to create very interactive web applications. Let's look at an AJAX example. In this example, I run code in the W3 Schools online editor. This allows me to test out HTML, CSS and JavaScript without having to install anything on my computer. Here I have some regular HTML that contains a button. When the button is clicked, it fires the load doc JavaScript function. This uses AJAX. What that means is that it uses the XML HTTP request object in JavaScript. You can use this object to make calls to servers that are somewhere else, without having to refresh the page. This is the essence of the AJAX technique. In this case, I attach this event to the XML HTTP object. This fires when the state of the object changes, which usually happens when it makes a call to an external server. When it does that, and when all went well, it changes the text of the HTML object demo, which is a div here. It gets the text to put in the div from a document that it gets here. In this case, the document is located on the same server as the HTML document. But from here, I can call any URL to get info or to post something to. Let's see it in action. When the button is clicked, it retrieves the text from the document and displays that, all without refreshing the page, only the content. Now, this is pretty advanced, so don't worry if you don't get it. The main takeaway here is that you can use the AJAX technique to do advanced things like call APIs and work with results without refreshing the page. Essentially, this provides the tools to create a complete application in JavaScript without any code that runs server-side like C#. Alright, we've seen that JavaScript can be used to interact with HTML, the browser, and even resources like APIs that aren't in the browser. Most of the features of JavaScript are described in the ECMAScript standard, which is implemented by web browsers. This is similar to how web browsers implement the HTML and CSS specification. This means that browsers not always support the specification completely and might have different implementations of features. It's all up to the browsers. So in the case of the XML HTTP request object in JavaScript that we've just seen, it is supported by all major browsers except for Opera Mini. Also for JavaScript, you can look up which browsers support which features using the website caniuse.com.